Secretary Raimondo, I want to start talking about the CHIPS Act, which we have before us right now. And I believe it's essential that we fund the CHIPS Act so we can grow good-paying jobs here in America, involved in designing and making semiconductor chips. But funding the CHIPS Act isn't just about creating jobs in the semiconductor industry. It's about supporting all the jobs that depend on those semiconductor chips. And in a modern economy, chips play a vital role, certainly in many, many different areas, but there's no better example in my mind than the auto industry. In the 1970s, some cars just had a handful of chips, but now, a few decades later, the modern cars can contain up to 10,000 semiconductor chips in every car that handles everything from safety features to telematics to entertainment systems. And certainly that explains why the recent chip shortage has hurt auto production, as I know you're very well aware, along with many workers and families whose livelihoods are impacted by it. It's bad for the whole economy, and the ripple effects in the auto industry go through the whole economy. And that's why I think when we think about policies to support domestic semiconductor production, we must also ensure that we're addressing the needs of our economy and national security. Senator Stabenow and I led legislation which has passed the Senate and the House to dedicate $2 billion in CHIPS Act incentives to boost domestic production of semiconductor chips required for auto productions, referred to as mature chips, the kinds of chips that are necessary for other manufacturers, not just auto industry, but things like washing machines and everyday appliances. So my question for you, Madam Secretary, is do you support the proposal to dedicate $2 billion in the CHIPS Act incentives to growing and domestic production of mature semiconductor technologies in the United States? And if Congress does indeed fund the CHIPS Act, which I hope we will do soon, will you commit to ensuring that the department implements these funds in consultation with industries and workers, particularly in industries like the auto industry? If you could talk about that, I'd appreciate it.
Nice to see you, Senator. Yes, the answer is yes and yes. I would say it isn't just the auto industry. The medical device industry, for example, is a huge consumer of these quote-unquote legacy chips, mature, feature-rich chips. And in the recent RFI that we did, we found that this is where the shortage is. So yes, we would support it, and yes, we absolutely will implement it in coordination with industry and with you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Secretary. One area that I've been particularly focused on is making sure that our supply chains are resilient so that we can expand domestic production of these chips. And in December, I introduced the Investing in Domestic Semiconductor Manufacturing Act, along with several of my colleagues, including many on this committee. The bill would clarify provisions of the CHIPS Act to ensure that upstream suppliers are eligible for incentives to grow. These are suppliers that make chip manufacturing possible by providing the necessary materials and the manufacturing equipment necessary to produce these chips. Indeed, I believe your department's analysis of semiconductor supply chains discussed the important role of these upstream suppliers and the role that they play in supporting our national goals. For all these reasons, the House included the language in the competitiveness package in the Competes Act. And now as we go to conference, and I've been appointed as one of the conferees for negotiations, we're going to be fighting to make sure that that proposal gets put into the final product. So my question to you, Madam Secretary, is do you agree that domestic semiconductor production will be at risk if we fail to adequately support upstream suppliers that actually facilitate chip manufacturing?
Absolutely, there's no doubt of that. I would be remiss if I didn't say and implore you and your colleagues to act with urgency through that conference process. As we discussed earlier, there's a very real risk of waiting here, which is that these chip companies are going to be expanding, and they'll expand in other countries if we don't move quickly. So I am at your service to do whatever I can to move that conference quickly.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think you agree with the general proposal that we have that would ensure that upstream suppliers are actually eligible for some of those CHIP Act incentives. As we put that out, it's not just the manufacturers themselves; it's that entire supply chain.
The whole supply chain.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for your leadership on this issue as well. Appreciated you coming out to Detroit not too long ago to dig deeper into the issue of the auto industry. I know it's something you're passionate about, and I appreciate your interest in Michigan as well. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator.